Welcome to episode 3 of how to make your own reusable homemade rocket. Today we're going to be building a piston that will replace the normal wadding that you would use to protect your parachutes in any typical store-bought rocket. Now you can go about this several ways. You can use a flimsy piece of cardboard like this one. Like I said in an earlier episode, you can also use a pop can, 24-pack or 12-pack boxes. Those work really well, probably better than that cardboard. And then you could you also have thicker cardboard, but I do not recommend using this for the actual cylinder you're going to be making for the piston because it doesn't bend, it will just fold. You definitely want it to have a lot of give, a lot of bend to it. And if you decide to go this route, what you're going to do is basically the same principle you used for your engine mount. You're going to use your rocket body tube to roll this cardboard so you can make a cylinder out of it. However, I recommend you use a second toilet paper roll because it's already a cylinder. It's already the shape you need it to be. Now you can't use a toilet paper roll if your body tube is bigger than the toilet paper roll, but you can use it if it's about the same size as your rocket tube or if your rocket tube is smaller. But anyway, if you're going to use the cardboard method, what you'll do is you'll roll it up and you'll fit it inside of your rocket tube. And then once you have it perfectly fit to where there's just a little bit of friction but it doesn't get stuck, you could go ahead and tape it to hold it in position and then glue it down. But I'm going to be doing a third way today. I'm actually going to be cutting off the top of my rocket body tube to make my own cylinder. This will shorten the height of my rocket and make it a little bit lighter, and that way it will climb a little bit higher when we launch it. I'm going to make it the same size as the toilet paper roll, so I'm going to mark it there where I can cut it. I'm going to go cut it and then I'll be right back. Okay, so what I did was I cut the tube where it needed to be, but then I needed to fit it inside of my rocket tube, so I had to cut it right up the middle, which is what you're going to have to do with your toilet paper roll if that's the route you decide to go. Then I just trimmed a little bit extra off, kind of like I did with the rocket mount, and then glued the ends together with super glue. And then it became kind of like an oval shaped, and it wouldn't really fit in my rocket tube, so I had to press it down with my palm and then glue the inside of it with hot glue to kind of keep it as a circular cylinder. And when it dried, it held, so it worked really well. So if you're using the toilet paper roll, just cut it up the middle, just like you did with the engine mount, and then try your best to roll it up just slightly so it loses its diameter a little bit, so you can fit it inside your rocket. You'll have to roll it up a little bit more if your rocket is a little bit narrower, but if you're using a paper towel roll as your rocket body tube, you'll just have to roll it up just a little bit. Once you got it at your desired position, you can go ahead and tape it down to hold it while you glue it. It's kind of tricky, but if you have patience, you'll be fine. But yeah, once you have that, you'll essentially have what I have here. And this is the cylinder part of your piston. But if you know anything about pistons, you'll know that they are actually covered. So we're going to have to make covers for our cylinders, and so we can completely enclose them. The way a piston works in a combustion engine is when it's propelled forward or up by a controlled explosion, it actually propels a crankshaft that moves your tires. That's why your car moves. Now we're using the same principle, only instead of moving tires, we're going to move our recovery system, our parachutes, out the top of the rocket with our sliding pistons because of the combustion below the piston. Now, like your engine mount rings, you want to make this perfect. You want to take your time cutting it out, and you want it to just cover the top of your cylinder. You don't want it sticking out too much because you don't want a lot of friction inside your rocket tube. It needs to effortlessly slide in and out of your rocket tube, but at the same time it can't be too loose that hot gas can just escape around the outside of the cylinder and reach your parachutes. Once you have your two caps for both ends cut to the perfect dimensions, go ahead and take some super glue and lay a light coat around the top of the cylinder end. And then we'll put that cap on top. Hold it down for 30 seconds. Make sure it's on there nice and even. It's not sticking out and it's not off center. After that 30 seconds, you can go ahead and use more super glue to really secure that piston end cap. Going 2 times speed here. And once that's dry, you can go ahead and test it and make sure it fits nice and easily within your rocket tube. And then do the other end. So when you're finished, the whole thing should be able to slide effortlessly inside your rocket tube. And you should be able to hear it scraping a little bit, but it shouldn't get stuck. Okay, so from here you get a choice. You can either leave it as it is, or you can do what I'm going to do. Now, one of the reasons why I cut my tube off is because, like I said, I wanted to weigh a little bit less. I wanted my rocket to be a little bit smaller, a little bit shorter. And by doing that, I'm not going to have very much room to put my parachute on top of the piston to have my piston push it out the top of the rocket. So what I want to do is I want to give this piston a dual purpose. Not only is it going to protect my parachute, but it's going to deploy it as well. So I'm going to cut out a big old door in this piston and utilize it as my parachute bay. Now, if you have a longer rocket and you have plenty of room on the top of your piston to pack a full parachute, and you can skip ahead to the 16-minute, 45-second mark. But for the rest of you that want to use your piston as a parachute bay as well and maybe save a little room and let your rocket climb a little bit higher, stick with me here because I'm going to show you what to do. So we're going to cut out an opening for our parachute. Now I'm going to use this seam from where I cut my cylinder apart and glued it back together as the back end. So I'm going to make a mark exactly 180 degrees on the front end. Then I'm going to rotate the cylinder 90 degrees and make another mark on the left hand side. I'll rotate it 180 degrees from there so it's the right hand side, and I'll make another mark 90 degrees from the front, 90 degrees from the back. Now, to the best that I can eyeballing it, I'm going to use this ruler and try to draw a straight line right down the middle of the cylinder. And this is the front mark on my cylinder. Alright, looks pretty straight. Now we'll go ahead and do the left line. Going 2 times speed here. And then we'll do the right hand side. Same thing. So when you're done, you should have 3 lines, or maybe 4 if you needed to draw a line for the back end as a reference. But you need 3 lines, one in the front and one on each side, 90 degrees apart. Now once you have that down, you want to make another mark on that front line, a 1/2 centimeter from the end, on both ends. And just make them really prominent so you can see them really good. Now for the left and right lines, you want to make a mark 2 centimeters from the end. So you'll end up making 4 of those marks, 2 on each line. Okay, so I'm just going to use my shot cord as like a ruler, or a straight edge, if you will. And I'm going to connect the dots here. I'm going to connect the top dot on the front line to the top dot on the left line. And it should look something like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the right line. I'm going to connect the top dot on the right line to the top dot on the front line. And then same goes for the bottom part of the cylinder. What we're doing here is we're drawing a line to make our cuts. And there you go. This is what it should look like when you're finished marking your lines. This is what we're going to cut out. This is our opening, or our door. Just going to cut along these lines right here. Now, if you're using a toilet paper roll for your piston, you can use scissors and easily cut through and cut out your door. But since what I'm using is a thicker piece of cardboard tubing, I'm gonna have to use a box cutter. And it actually works surprisingly easy. Now, just be careful if you decide to use any box cutters during this project that you really watch yourself. Always know what you're doing and where your fingers are at. Okay, if you cut yourself, that's on you. Be smart. Take your time. Go easy. There's no need to rush this. See how I'm just working it very gently. I'm not really putting too much muscle into it at all. It's so easy for your knife to slip, and you don't want your fingers to be there when that happens. So we're cutting down those lines, and when you're finished, it should look like this. Kind of looks like a little rowboat. And it should still fit nicely inside your tubing. And you can just go ahead and discard that cap there that you just cut out. Now, the next thing we want to do is, since we have this opportunity, we really want to secure those caps on. Since we couldn't glue the insides after we got the caps on, we want to go ahead and do that now. That will really reinforce their structure. Because with that front plate missing, your cardboard cylinder really has a tendency to want to bend. That's why we left that 1/2 centimeter on the top and bottom of your cylinder, to keep it from bending. So we really want to reinforce that structure by really gluing these down further. Okay, so next we need to cut a hole in the bottom part of the cylinder so we can feed our shot cord through it. And this will secure our piston to our rocket so it doesn't just fly away when it ejects. So what I'm doing is I'm using the box cutter, and you can use scissors for this, just nice and easily make a small incision in the bottom cap of the piston. Do not make this too big. You want it just enough so you can fit your shot cord through it. The wiggling that I'm doing with the knife is just to move the fraying cardboard out of the way. I'm not actually trying to cut it any further. And then once you have that, you can go ahead and feed your shot cord through it, but do not secure it yet. You can go ahead and pull that out, and then we are going to get out some foil, and we're going to trace one of our piston caps on it. Now, foil may not be 100% necessity. Your piston may survive the ejection charge without it, but it will definitely last longer if you use foil. So if you have it around the house, go get some. Trim it down to precision. You're only going to need one of these to cover the bottom part of your piston, the part that's going to face the engine. And then once you have it to the perfect size, go ahead and lay down some super glue. Lay it down thinly, but lay it down all over the top so it doesn't peel off. Make sure you get around the rims. Then lay the foil on there. Make sure it's all smoothed out. And then really rub against that indentation where you made your insertion so you can see it. We'll be poking that hole through clean. Now if you decided not to make your piston into a parachute bay, you won't be feeding your shock cord through the actual piston. What you want to do is you'll want to cut your foil ring out, cut a little slat in the middle of your foil ring, feed your shock cord through it, and then glue that end of the shock cord to the bottom of your piston on that bottom cap. And then glue down the foil ring onto the cap. You'll see me use a lighter in this series a few times, and what I'm doing is I'm just singeing the ends of my cords so they don't fray. And once you have that through, go ahead and glue that down and hold it for 30 seconds. Once it's dry, it should be really secure. Now the end with that shock cord always goes in first, and it should still come out pretty effortlessly. Okay, so for those of you doing the piston the way I am, with the parachute bay in the middle, the next thing you're going to want to do is sand a little indentation valley type thing on the top part of your piston. This will allow your pilot chute cord to be fed through alongside the piston inside the rocket tube. Now, like I said earlier, I have reinforced cardboard tubing, so it's thicker. So I'm going to be sanding a pretty decent indent in the side of this piston. Now, if you're using a toilet paper roll, which is really thin or something similar, you're probably not going to be able to do this very well. In fact, you may not have to do it at all. If your cap is hanging over the end of your piston cylinder a little bit, then you can probably do it in your cap. But just give it a try. Take a little piece of cord or string that you're going to use to attach your pilot chute to your parachute, and see how that works just rubbing up alongside there. You may not have to do this at all. Yeah, our pilot chute is going to rest on top of the piston while our main chute will be in the piston itself. Okay, so once you have that finished, the next thing you want to do is measure out where your stopping pins are going to be. Now these stopping pins will allow room for that shock cord to rest between the piston and the engine. You don't want your piston smashed all the way against your engine, which could allow your shock cord to be pushed up right against the engine exhaust, which would not be good. So I'm just eyeballing it. I'm pretty sure our engine would be right about here. So I'm going to mark the engine coming to about right here on the outside of my tube. And then I want to leave about 2 inches of room between the top of my piston and the top of my rocket tube. So I'm going to push this in to about 2 inches. And then I'm going to leave that mark on the outside of my tube as well. Okay, my piston is 4 inches long. So from that last mark where the top of my piston will be inside there, I'm going to mark 4 inches down from there. and that's where my piston will end inside the tube. So from the top of the engine to the bottom of the piston is about 3 inches right there, and that's where our shock cord will be resting inside the rocket. Now we're going to mark the places for our stopping pins. You can use 2 or 3 stopping pins, it's up to you. I'm just going to use 2. And you'll see me use this method quite a bit just because I don't have a tape measure lying around. So what I do is I just use this cord, and you can use kite string or yarn or whatever you want to do. And this is how you measure circumference. So our cylinder is just about 5 inches in circumference. So divide that by 2 and you get just over 2.5. So we will be placing one of our stopping pins on that black mark and the other stopping pin exactly 180 degrees from that mark where the 2 ends meet. So I'm going to mark on my tube where I'm going to be pushing these pins through. And then I'm going to just slightly press these in, but I'm not going to actually puncture the tube yet. I want to make sure these are lined up perfectly straight so the piston is resting on both of these. Once you have those pins in there, go ahead and lightly super glue them down. And yes, our piston still rests about 2 inches from the top of our rocket, which will leave room for the pilot chute and the nose cone, which we will make in the next episode.